I died at his hands twice. The first time my heart died, the second time my body perished. The wind on the cliff was fierce. He didn't even hesitate when he let go. I watched his face grow smaller and smaller as the sea shattered my spine. The agony lasted only 2 seconds. Just before I sank into darkness, I heard him shout, "Rosa! I've finally avenged you." That name I will never forget for as long as I live. Rosa. His first love from high school, the poor student everyone saw, the good girl, the model of perseverance. And me, Freya, was nothing more than the stand-in he had hated for 10 years. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. There was still an 4 needle in my wrist, and the monitor beeped rhythmically. Sunlight seeped through the gap in the white curtains, stinging my eyes until tears fell. Not from the pain. It was the date on my phone screen. June 5, 2016. The last day before the college entrance exam. I picked up my phone and saw a message from Julian, "The exam is tomorrow. Don't be nervous. Once it's over, we can be together openly." The message was sent at 1 in the morning. I stared at it for a long time. In my past life, he said the same thing. After the exam, he held my hand and announced our relationship in front of everyone. Everyone said we were a match made in heaven. Julian, captain of the school basketball team, consistently ranked in the top 10 of his grade, from a well-off family, gentle and refined. Everyone thought I wasn't good enough for him. But he chose me. I was grateful for 7 whole years, giving up everything of myself to make him excellent. Until he pushed me off a cliff. I didn't reply. My phone buzzed again. It was a voice message from my best friend Chloe. "Freya, the exam is tomorrow. Your mom told me to remind you not to forget your admission ticket." I replied with "Mm." Then I picked up the apple from the nightstand and took a slow bite. The feeling of falling off the cliff in my past life is still etched into my bones. The chill of the seawater, the sound of my spine snapping, the look in his eyes, in that moment, he wasn't acting. He truly hated me. Hated me to the bone. Hated me for 10 whole years. I grew up in the town. Our families were old friends, and Julian and I had been playing in the mud together since we were kids. He was 2 years older than me, tall, and the kind of child everyone compared their own kids to. My mom always said, "If only you were half as sensible as Julian." I really tried to be sensible. I competed in grades, in talents, in poise. In 6th grade, I ranked first in the entire town. He patted my head and said, "Freya, you're amazing." I was happy for an entire month. In high school, he got into the city's key school, and I got in the following year. He stood at the school gate waiting for me, smiling as he said, "I've got your back from now on." That was September 2014. Rosa also enrolled that year. The first time I saw her was in the cafeteria. She was carrying a tray when she tripped and fell right in front of me, soup spilling all over the floor. Julian was the first to stand up, helping her pick up the dishes and asking if she was burned. She said she was fine, but her eyes were red. Afterward, Julian told me, "That girl is so pitiful. I heard her family is in a tough spot, both her parents are sick, and she only eats 1 meal a day." I didn't think much of it at the time. Later, she started showing up frequently at the door of our classroom. She said she came to ask about homework, but she always sought out Julian. She stood at a distance, looking timid, as if she might bolt at any moment. Julian would always go out. They stood in the hallway, she asked with her head lowered, and he spoke patiently. The wind blew her bangs aside as she looked up at him, her eyes full of admiration. I began to feel uncomfortable. But I didn't dare say anything. I was afraid he would think I was petty or immature. In my past life, I chose to endure. To prove that I was better than Rosa, I pushed myself to rank among the top 3 in my grade, to learn things she couldn't. Every time Julian praised me, I felt like I had won. But he never said he loved me. He only ever said, "We're a good fit, you're so good to me, you're the one who understands me best." I thought it was just his personality. It wasn't until the summer after the college entrance exams that Rosa asked to meet him. Crying, she said, "I'm not good enough for you. You already have Freya. I wish you both the best." The first thing Julian did when he came back was kiss me. He kissed me hard. I thought it was passion. Now I realize, he was just using me to prove to himself that he wasn't that kind of person. In college, we were in the same city. He studied finance, I studied design. When he was busy with the student council, I helped him organize his materials. When he was preparing for internships, I helped him polish his resume. Rosa went to a neighboring province for school. She did well, earning scholarships. Occasionally, she would send Julian messages like, "Senior, do you still remember me?" or "I got first in my major today." Every time, he would reply. After replying, he would be gentler with me. I thought he cared about me. I didn't know it was guilt. In my junior year of my past life, something happened to Julian's family. His father's company had a funding chain break and owed a huge debt. He said he needed my help, so I gave him all my savings and even had my mother act as a guarantor to borrow $500,000 from relatives. He said he would pay it back after graduation. Later, he graduated and joined an investment bank with a monthly salary of $50,000. When I asked about the money, he said to wait a little longer, the company's funds were tight. I waited. Another year passed, then 2, then 3. He poured all his money into his own company, and his career flourished. I quit my job to help him manage the company's affairs, no shares, no position, no security of any kind. He said, "You're the boss's wife, why would you need shares?" I said okay. After graduating with a master's degree, Rosa came back and joined his company. Her excuse was, "Senior, I really can't find a job anywhere else. Can you take me in?" He agreed. I didn't. He said, "Don't be so petty. You know her family situation." Rosa was indeed pitiful. Both her parents had passed away, her younger brother was still in school, and she was shouldering the burden of the entire family alone. She dressed plainly, ate very little, and stayed late at the office every day. Everyone in the company felt sorry for her. Julian felt especially sorry for her. He started coming home late. I went to the company to look for him and saw Rosa making coffee for him, her head bowed, her voice soft, "Senior, don't push yourself too hard." The way he looked at her, I had never seen it before. That wasn't the look he gave a subordinate. In my past life, I chose to keep enduring. I told myself, he's just soft-hearted, he's just kind, he just doesn't know how to say no. Until that day, when he was drunk and held me, saying, "I'm so tired." I thought he was talking to me. What he said was, "Rosa, I'm really so tired." I stood at the bedroom door, the hangover soup in my hand crashing to the floor. He woke up, saw me, and his first reaction wasn't guilt, it was panic. It was only later that I understood that panic, he wasn't afraid of losing me, he was afraid of losing my resources. His company, his connections, my money, everything was sustained by my efforts. Without me, he was nothing. But I was already in too deep. The money I borrowed for him, the guarantees I made for him, everything I gave up for him. If we separated, I would have nothing left. I chose to pretend I didn't know. He chose to keep up the act. Until the day before the wedding. He said he wanted to go see the sunrise at the beach. I thought he was going to propose to me. He brought me to the edge of the cliff, gazed at the sea, and asked, "Freya, do you know who the person I hate most in this life is?" I thought he was referring to a competitor. "You." He turned around, with an expression on his face I had never seen before. "If it weren't for you, I would have been with Rosa long ago. Your mother forced us to be together, you clung to me, and everyone kept saying, 'You two are a perfect match, who the hell wants to be a match with you?' I want Rosa. I've liked her since my first year of high school, but you've stuck to me like a stubborn plaster, and I don't even have the right to break up. The moment I say I want to break up, everyone will call me a heartless bastard. Do you know how long I've lived like this? 10 years. He grabbed my neck and pushed me toward the edge of the cliff. Rosa rejected me because of you. She said she didn't want to ruin someone else's relationship. It's all because of you. If you didn't exist, we would have gotten married long ago. So go die. He let go. I fell. The first thought I had when I woke up was, I'm done playing. My phone was still buzzing. Chloe had sent over a dozen messages, the last one reading, Freya, are you okay? Do you want me to come see you at the hospital? I replied, I'm fine. See you at the exam hall tomorrow. Then I messaged Julian. Let's break up. After the exam, I'll tell everyone it was my decision. Sent the message and turned off the phone. Time to sleep. In my past life, it took me 10 years to learn to let go. This time, it only took me 10 seconds. The next day was the exam. Julian blocked my way at the entrance of the teaching building. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept all night. Freya, what do you mean by that? I looked up at him. Exactly what I said. Why? Just because I didn't reply to your message yesterday? I was afraid it would affect your mood for the exam. I shook my head. No need to explain. I told you, I'll make it clear that I was the one who dumped you. You don't have to worry about your reputation. His expression changed. I knew him too well. What he cared about most was his reputation, the perfect persona in everyone's eyes. In my past life, he didn't dare to bring up breaking up because he was afraid of being criticized. Now I was helping him solve this problem. I'll let you and Rosa be together. With that, I walked away. He stood there watching me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. After the last exam, I announced the breakup at the school gate. I posted a message, just one sentence, already broken up with Julian. Wishing him well. Please don't bother. Chloe replied instantly. Others also started asking. I didn't respond. Julian didn't make any statement. Instead, Rosa posted a photo of the sky with the caption, "Some things can finally be done in the open." She deleted it right after posting. Chloe took a screenshot and showed it to me, furious. What does she mean? Was she just waiting for this day to come? I wasn't angry. In my past life, I would have been angry, would have felt betrayed, would have gone to confront Rosa, and then Julian would step in to defend her, making me feel even more wronged, and him even more annoyed with me. This time I did nothing. I deleted all of Julian's contacts and blocked his number. Then I started preparing to go abroad. I had prepared to study abroad in my past life too, but I gave it up for him. He said he didn't want a long-distance relationship, that he'd marry me once I graduated and came back. I believed him. This time I trusted no one. My TOEFL score was already in hand, and I put together my portfolio in 2 weeks. I applied to the University of the Arts London, and 3 months later, I got the offer. Before leaving, I went home for a visit. My mom asked me why I broke up. I said it just wasn't right. She then asked if I had been the one to dump him. I said yes. She let out a sigh of relief. That's good. I was afraid you might take it too hard. I smiled. I won't. In my past life, I did take it too hard. For someone who didn't love me, I nearly ruined my own life. Not this time. At the end of September, I flew to London. The moment the plane took off, I turned off my phone. When I landed and turned it back on, it was flooded with messages from Chloe. Julian and Rosa are together. They went public the night you left. Rosa wrote this long cheesy post, something like, thankful for fate's gift and after waiting all these years, I finally have you. Disgusting. I replied with an O. Chloe sent a string of exclamation marks, that's all you have to say? I took a photo of a London street scene and sent it to her. A new life begins. I spent 3 years in London. Studied design, created works, won awards, and landed a job at a decent company. My feed was all about work, exhibitions, and travel. Chloe always said my life looked like a magazine cover, too polished to be real. But there was nothing polished about it. Just waking up early for work every day, working late nights, and visiting museums on weekends. Occasionally drinking with friends and watching the night view of the Thames. It was just that he wasn't there anymore. I heard about Julian from Chloe. She updates me every now and then, like I'm following a TV series. Julian and Rosa are living together, in a house his parents gave them. Rosa said she was pregnant, but it turned out to be a stomach issue. She hadn't been eating properly and messed up her stomach. Julian's dad's company is in trouble, and they owe a lot of money. I read every single one, and replied to each with a hum. It wasn't deliberate coldness, I just genuinely didn't care that much anymore. Chloe said I was cold-blooded. I told her it wasn't cold-bloodedness, it was waking up. The first time I saw them again was Christmas 2019. I was back home for the new year, and Chloe dragged me to a class reunion. She said, "If you don't come, it'll look like you still care," so I went. There were 3 tables set up in the hotel banquet room. Julian was sitting in the corner. He had lost a lot of weight, his cheekbones protruding slightly, and his eyes no longer held their former brightness. He wore a dark gray coat, still looking decent, but something seemed to have been drained from him. Rosa sat beside him. She had put more effort into her appearance than before, with permed curls and light makeup. But her complexion was poor, her lips pale, and when she smiled, her eyes didn't crinkle. They sat together but barely spoke. When I walked in, everyone fell silent for a second. Chloe held my arm and deliberately said in a loud voice, "Freya, you're finally back, the big London designer." I smiled and greeted familiar faces. Julian looked up at me. His gaze was complicated, there was surprise, resentment, and something else I couldn't quite read. I didn't look at him. I sat down at the table opposite and chatted with classmates I'd never been very close to before. The atmosphere gradually warmed up. Halfway through the meal, Rosa came over with a glass in hand. She stood in front of me, wearing a picture-perfect smile. "Freya, long time no see." I looked up. "Yeah. I heard you're doing really well in London. I'm genuinely happy for you. The past is behind us now, let me toast to you." I didn't take the cup. "Just say what you need to say." Her smile stiffened for a moment. "I just wanted to apologize to you. Back then, Julian and we really did wrong by you." Chloe let out a cold snort beside me. I glanced at Julian out of the corner of my eye. He was looking down at his phone, his ears red. I understood. He regretted it. Or rather, he realized that without me, his life hadn't gotten any better. I stood up and grabbed a glass of juice. "No need to apologize. Your business has nothing to do with me." I clinked her glass but didn't drink. "I'm leaving now. I have a flight to catch tomorrow." Chloe left with me. As soon as we stepped out of the hotel, she laughed. "Did you see Julian's expression? He looked like he wanted to devour you." I didn't laugh. Whether he's doing well or not has nothing to do with me. In 2020, the pandemic arrived. I experienced lockdown in London, staying alone for 3 months. Every day, I worked in front of my computer, had groceries delivered, and my only exercise was pacing around the house. Those days were lonely, but I wasn't afraid. In my past life, I was afraid of loneliness. Afraid of eating alone, sleeping alone, spending the new year alone. So I clung tightly to Julian, even though he didn't love me. Now I know that loneliness is far more comfortable than being tormented by someone who doesn't love you. The day the lockdown ended, I went out and walked for a long time. London's sky was grey and hazy, with very few people on the streets. I walked to the River Thames and stood there, staring blankly at the water. A man came up and asked if I was lost. He was very tall, wearing a mask that only revealed his eyes. Deep brown, very bright. I said no, I was just taking a walk. He nodded. Alone? Yeah. Me too. He smiled, his eyes crinkling. I'm Samuel. Can I get to know you? Samuel was Chinese-American, a third-generation immigrant who ran an architectural design studio in London. We met by the river, the second time at a coffee shop, the third at an art gallery, and the fourth on his balcony. His cooking was amazing. Once he made braised pork ribs, and I burst into tears after just one bite. He was startled and asked me what was wrong. I said it was nothing, I just hadn't had Chinese food in so long. He said I should come over more often after that. And so I did. Getting together just happened naturally. There was no confession, no ceremony. One day he took my hand, and I didn't pull away. He asked me, Freya, are you single? I said yes. Then it's not anymore, starting now. I said okay. This relationship was completely different from my past life. Samuel never made me guess what he was thinking. If he missed me, he'd call, if he was angry, he'd say so, if he was happy, he'd spin me around in his arms. When I worked late, he'd come pick me up with food. I told you didn't need to come. He said I know you don't, but I wanted to. Once I asked him how many relationships he'd had before. He said 2. Why did you break up? They thought I wasn't romantic enough. I laughed. He asked me, and I said I'd been in one relationship, 10 years. He was silent for a long time. Then you must have loved him very much. I thought about it. Maybe it wasn't love. It was habit. He looked at me. Are you used to me now? I said I was still getting used to it. He said I'd better hurry up, because he wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because I was sad, but because it all felt unreal. So this is what it feels like to be truly loved by someone. In 2022, I was promoted to design director. That same year, Samuel's studio landed its first major project. We were swamped with work, barely having a moment to breathe, but we called each other every day. Sometimes it was just a quick busy day today, before hanging up. Chloe said I had changed. The way you talk now is completely different. Before, you'd always sound stiff when mentioning Julian. Now you don't even say his name anymore. I said it was because it no longer mattered. She sent a rolling eyes emoji. Do you even know what Julian is up to now? Don't care. Let me finish first. Chloe told me that Julian's father's company had completely collapsed. He owed tens of millions, and all the houses and cars were seized to pay off the debts. Julian's own investment firm also ran into trouble. He had misappropriated client funds and was sued. Rosa married him. They had the wedding in early 2021. They didn't invite many people, not even Chloe. They just got the marriage certificate at the Civil Affairs Bureau and posted a photo online. The caption read, "Finally." Chloe said that finally gave her goosebumps. After marriage, Rosa quit her job, saying she wanted to prepare for pregnancy. But she never got pregnant, and tests showed her body was too weak, with poor uterine conditions. Julian started drinking heavily. Chloe heard from mutual friends that one day Julian got drunk and smashed everything in the house, and Rosa called the police. When the police arrived, Julian was still cursing, saying it was all her fault. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have broken up with Freya and ended up in this situation. Rosa said through tears, "You chose me yourself." He slapped her. The police took him away. After hearing all this, I was silent for a long time. Chloe asked me, "Do you still hate him?" I thought about it. I don't hate him anymore. Really? Really. Hating someone is too exhausting. I don't want to waste any more emotions on him. Chloe sent a hugging emoji. Freya, you've really changed. I put down my phone and looked out the window. Autumn in London was beautiful, half the leaves had turned yellow, and the sunlight hitting the glass of the building across the street was dazzling. Samuel sent a message, "What do you want for dinner?" I replied, "I'll eat whatever you make." He sent a smug emoji. "I'm getting off work early today. I'll make you Buddha jumps over the wall." Can you make Buddha jumps over the wall? I'll give it a try. If I fail, we'll just order takeout. I laughed. In the spring of 2023, I returned to China on a business trip. The company sent me back for the Beijing Design Week. Samuel happened to be free and came along with me, saying he wanted to see the place where I grew up. We spent 3 days in Beijing first, finished our work, and then took the high-speed train back to my hometown. When my mom saw Samuel, she held his hand and asked him all sorts of questions, her eyes narrowing into slits with joy. Samuel was smooth-tongued, calling her auntie so sweetly that my mom was utterly delighted. He brought tea and health supplements, saying she looked as young as someone in her 40s, and my mom laughed so hard she nearly choked. That evening, my mom pulled me aside to talk. "This one is good, a million times better than that Julian." I said, "Don't bring him up." "I won't. I just think you're doing great now. Before, when you were with Julian, even I felt exhausted just watching you. You had to read his moods, guess what he was thinking, clean up after him." My mom sighed. "This boyfriend of yours now, there's a light in his eyes when he looks at you." I didn't say anything. My mom was right. The way Samuel looks at me is different from Julian. When Julian looked at me, there was always scrutiny in his eyes, scrutiny of whether I was good enough, polished enough, worthy enough of him. When Samuel looks at me, he just looks at me. No strings attached. On the 3rd day back in my hometown, I ran into Rosa. At the town grocery store, I was picking out local specialties while she browsed instant noodles in the snack aisle. She had lost a lot of weight. So much that her cheekbones were prominent, her eyes sunken, and the veins on her neck were visible. She wore a faded, peeled gray hoodie, her hair carelessly tied back, and she looked 10 years older than her actual age. She saw me first. I was turning my shopping cart and nearly bumped into her. She looked up, froze for a second, then quickly looked down. "Freya." "Yeah." There was a meter between us. The light on the shelf was so bright that every flaw on her face was exposed. I noticed a bruise at the corner of her mouth, which the foundation couldn't cover. I didn't ask. She didn't say anything either. After a few seconds of silence, she suddenly spoke, "Julian hasn't been doing well lately." I waited. "You've heard about the company, right? His father owes a lot of money. He's been going around asking people to lend him some, but no one is willing to. He drinks every night, and once he's drunk, he loses his temper. Last time he hit me, I called the police, but then I dropped the charges." She looked up at me, her eyes reddening. "Freya, could you lend us some money?" I looked at her. In my past life, she had come to Julian with the same red-rimmed eyes to borrow money. The difference was that back then she was faking it, now she was probably genuine. But I couldn't tell the difference anymore, and I didn't want to. "No." Her tears fell. "Just 200,000, please, my brother still needs to go to school." "Your brother's business has nothing to do with me." I pushed the shopping cart and walked away. After 2 steps, I stopped. "Rosa." She looked up. "You chose to be with Julian yourself." I didn't turn back. As I walked out of the supermarket, Samuel was waiting for me at the entrance, holding 2 cups of milk tea. "All done?" "All done." He glanced at my expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just ran into an old acquaintance." "A former classmate?" "Yeah." I didn't explain much, and he didn't ask either. After getting in the car, he handed me the milk tea and said he'd ordered taro bubble tea, hot, with 30% sugar. "How did you know I like 30% sugar?" "You mentioned it last time, don't you remember?" "I haven't forgotten. I'm just not used to anyone remembering." After that chance encounter, Chloe updated me again. Rosa is asking everyone for money, going around in circles. No one is lending her any. Julian got sued by the company for embezzlement. He might go to prison. He had a falling out with his mom. She said she's done with him. He's been posting some really scary stuff lately, all negative energy. A lot of people have blocked him. I read through them one by one, deleting each. Late one night, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered. There was silence on the other end. Hello? Julian? Freya. His voice was hoarse, unlike him. Before, his voice had been pleasant, clear and gentle, like a warm breeze in winter. Now it sounded like iron scraped with sandpaper. How have you been? Good. Silence. I heard you're in London, working as a designer? That's right. Good. He laughed, an unpleasant sound. You're really doing well for yourself. I said nothing. Freya, if I hadn't broken up with you back then. Was it you who broke up with me? I interrupted him. I was the one who brought it up. He fell silent again. Right, it was you. So what? So I want to ask you, if you'd never brought it up back then, where would we be now? There is no if. I hung up the phone and blocked that number too. Samuel asked who was calling. I said it was a wrong number. He didn't press further. In 2024, Julian's messages became fewer and fewer. Chloe said he no longer attended any social events, had long left the group chats, his phone was unreachable, and no one knew where he lived. Rosa would occasionally post updates on her feed. They were always those gloomy, self-pitying lines, like everything happens for the best or just get through it and it'll be fine. The accompanying picture was always a cup of coffee, or the cover of a book. Chloe said she was faking it. I said maybe it wasn't faking, maybe she really needed some emotional comfort. Chloe said, "You actually feel sorry for her?" I thought about it. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. From the very beginning, Rosa had treated Julian as her lifeline. She thought that latching onto him could change her fate, that she could crawl out of that impoverished quagmire. But what she didn't know was that Julian himself couldn't even stand steady. Two drowning people clinging to each other would only sink together. In the autumn of 2024, I received a package. There was no sender information, and inside was a photo album. I opened it, and it was filled with photos of Julian and me. From elementary school, middle school, and high school. Graduation photos, sports meets, spring and autumn outings. Some I had never seen before, they were candid shots he had taken. Every photo had writing on the back. Spring outing, 2010. She was laughing. At the 2012 sports meet, she finished the 800-meter dash, her face very red. On the first day of school in 2014, she couldn't find the classroom and cried anxiously in the hallway. The day before the 2016 college entrance exam, she was in the hospital, and I couldn't go see her. The last one was a solo photo of me. A London street scene, I was crossing the intersection in my trench coat, probably taken when I returned to China in 2022. On the back, it read, "I miss you." I closed the photo album. Sent it back to the return address. Attached a note, "Stop sending these." 2025, I died that year in my past life. October, a cliff, the sea. In this life, I lived to see the spring of that year. March, London, Samuel proposed to me. Nothing too special about the ceremony. He came home from work, bought flowers, and knelt on one knee in the living room. "Freya, marry me." I said yes. He froze. "Aren't you going to hesitate for a moment?" No hesitation. "Aren't you going to test me?" No test. His eyes reddened. "Did you already have this all planned out?" I smiled but didn't answer. The truth is, it wasn't that I had it planned. It's that it took me 2 lifetimes to learn one thing: the right person doesn't make you guess. He walks right up to you and tells you he's here, and he's not leaving. You don't have to give everything to prove you're worthy. You don't have to force a smile through the pain. He loves you, just loves you. No conditions. In June, Chloe sent me a string of voice messages, each one 60 seconds long. I didn't finish listening to them before I called her. What's wrong? Something happened to Julian. I held the phone, saying nothing. He's gone crazy, Chloe said. Julian had been in a terrible state lately, locking himself in his rented room all day. Rosa couldn't take it anymore and wanted a divorce, but he refused. They'd been arguing for a long time. Last week, he got drunk, grabbed a knife, and went looking for Rosa. He couldn't find her, so he went to Rosa's younger brother's school to ambush him. Rosa's brother called the police, and they took him away. At the police station, he confessed to something else. He said he wanted to kill Freya. He had been preparing for a long time, always looking for an opportunity. He tracked the timing of her return to China, looked up the hotel she was staying at, and even bought a plane ticket to London. But every time, he didn't go through with it. Not because he didn't dare, but because he never found the chance. The police asked him why he wanted to kill Freya. He said, if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have ended up like this. It was the exact same excuse as 10 years ago. Chloe's voice trembled. The police asked him why he didn't act. He said, seeing that she was doing well, he no longer wanted to. Not that he didn't want to kill her, but that he didn't want her to die so happily. I hung up the phone. My hands were a little cold. Samuel was cooking in the kitchen, his apron tied crookedly, the spatula held high as he battled the cooking fumes. He turned to look at me. What's wrong? You don't look well. It's nothing. I walked over and hugged him from behind. He paused for a moment. What's wrong? Not much. He turned off the fire, turned around, and hugged me. What's really going on? I buried my face in his chest. Nothing, I just feel, it's good to be alive. He didn't ask again. He just held me tighter. October. I'm in London, with Samuel snoring beside me. Rain is falling outside, tapping against the window pane. I pick up my phone and see a message from Chloe. Julian got sentenced. 7 years. I stare at it for a long time. 7 years ago I was reborn, 7 years later he goes to prison. What a coincidence. Chloe sends another message. Rosa divorced him. Her brother cut ties with her too, said she ruined the whole family. She's renting a place on her own now, working at a small restaurant. I didn't reply. I put down my phone and lay back on the bed. Samuel turned over, draping his arm across my waist, and mumbled, "Stop playing with your phone and go to sleep." I closed my eyes. On this day in my past life, I fell from a cliff, seawater flooding into my lungs, chillingly cold. On this day in my present life, I sleep peacefully in the London rain, held by the one I love. I haven't forgiven Julian. But I no longer hate him either. Hatred was the rope that bound me in my past life. In this one, I don't want to be tied down anymore. I just want to live well. Live for myself. 2026, my wedding with Samuel. It was held in a small church back in my hometown, with just relatives and a few friends invited. Chloe was the bridesmaid, and she cried even harder than I did. My mom cried too, but with a smile. Samuel's parents flew in from Canada. His mother held my hand and said, "We're family now." When we exchanged rings, Samuel's hands were trembling. I whispered, "Stop shaking." He said, "I'm not shaking." I said, "Then what are you shaking your hand for?" He said, "You're the one shaking." I looked down, my hands were trembling too. The two of us were shaking together on the stage, and Chloe was laughing her head off in the audience. The pastor asked Samuel if he was willing to marry me. He said yes. When asked, I said yes. Without hesitation. On the night of the wedding, Samuel and I sat on the balcony. He had been drinking, his face flushed, his eyes bright. Freya. Yeah. Have you suffered a lot in the past? I turned to look at him. Why do you ask? Because you're too easy to win over. He chuckled. No matter what I do, you think it's great. I buy you a bubble tea, and you're happy for half the day. I make a pot of braised pork, and you almost cry. It makes me feel like I haven't really earned it. I didn't say anything. He took my hand. You don't have to be so polite with me. You can lose your temper, you can be willful, you can say no to me. He looked at me, the light in his eyes warm. I married you, not because you're good to me. It's because I love you. I cried. For the second time in my life, I cried for someone. The first time was when I was pushed off the cliff. I don't hate anymore. Truly, I don't. I'm grateful for that rebirth. Not for revenge, but to live again. To live as myself. Another 6 months passed, and Chloe sent a message in the group chat. She said she had run into Rosa at a small supermarket in her hometown. Rosa was standing behind the checkout counter, wearing the supermarket's red vest, her hair casually tied back with a hair tie. The bruises on her face had faded, but she was terribly thin. Chloe said she almost didn't recognize her. Rosa also spotted Chloe, froze for a moment, then lowered her head and continued scanning items. Chloe didn't say a word to her. When it was time to pay, Rosa suddenly spoke up. Freya, is she doing well? Chloe said, good. Rosa nodded and said nothing more. Chloe walked out of the supermarket and glanced back. Rosa stood behind the checkout counter, staring blankly at the ceiling. One of the store's fluorescent tubes was broken, flickering on and off. Her face shifted between light and shadow, unreadable. Chloe was telling me about this while I was waiting for Samuel to finish work at his studio. The night view of London outside the window was beautiful, with countless lights twinkling. I replied with just one word, "Mmm." Then I turned off my phone and picked up the ring on the table to look at it. Samuel walked up from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. What are you looking at? Nothing. Let's go, time to head home. Okay. We walked out of the studio hand in hand. The London wind was a bit chilly, but his hand was warm.